Let's open our policy committee meeting, and I apologize for my delay. In terms of the agenda, I know that Rich, I'm already making you late. Are you okay? If we don't, all right. So we'll stick with the same order. That's not.
Hang on,
That's what I thought. Okay. Okay, so we did actually switch it. Okay. So item number 1, discussion of Board of Education Policy 3050, budget, board budget procedures and line item transfers. This is something that comes from Dr. Adley and from Rich, and it is a change in categorizing some of our groupings to be consistent with state law, but also keep consistent with some of our traditional notions of how we look at some of our expenditures. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the memo from Rich, but why don't I let you speak about it for a little bit.
We wanted to give everybody an update. We did discuss it in the finance budget committee 2 weeks ago. So a few years ago, the state came out with what they called the Unified Charter of Accounts. They created Chart of Accounts are salary, employee benefits, professional and technical services, property services, other services, supplies and materials, equipment, other, and revenue. So when the district has to submit state reports at the end of the year, whether it's the former EDO1 or the EFS financial reporting now, you are required to submit based on these uniform chart of accounts. So the recommendation at the finance committee meeting was to align the broad categories to those uniform chart of accounts. So there are the 9. There was discussion about whether or not we wanted to make tuition, for example, a subset of other services. So you can obviously break out as many subsets as you want. Utilities, would be, for example, would be a subset of supplies and materials. But there are essentially 9 categories within the Unified Chart of Accounts. And so the discussion was to bring this as a conversation piece about potentially updating the policy to reflect those 9 broad categories, and whether or not we wanted to have the subset of tuition as an example to make it 10, and then utilities as a subset of 11, and then from that point bring a recommended policy to Shipman and Goodwin that we could then bring back to this committee.
So in essence, we're going from what we have now, which is 10. The state standard are 9 categories, and if we do the hybrid, if you will, it would be 11 or 12. I'm looking at it's 12, right?
12.
Utilities, tuition,
Right.
tuition.
Yep.
So, we can all have some questions. Off the bat, I was wondering, so revenue doesn't appear before as a category for us. It is with the state, and that we would incorporate it into our new category. If you have tuition as separate categories, what typically would be revenue? What would be a revenue?
So revenue would be like excess costs. It could
Okay.
be your building fee rentals. Summer school, for example. So the tuition would be your expenditure, maybe an outplacement or a settlement for special education, or it could be, in some rare instances, some districts might have a student who goes to like an agri-science school, and then the home district pays a tuition. It's only in a few districts, but those would be more expenditures, whereas revenue would be actually receipts of money. So excess costs, summer school, things like that.
Okay. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Krista.
I'm sorry, could you just then, if we went with, you have a recommendation whether you would rather the 9 or the 12 for your purposes, and I'll start with that.
I'm probably more used to the 9.
Okay.
You still provide a line itemization of expenditures in the financial report, so it's not as if you wouldn't see necessarily tuition as an example, or electricity as a utility. It's just a matter of whether or not people have a preference to isolate those as its own subcategory. But typically districts will use the 9.
Okay, and then could you clarify where you would put any of those 10 that we currently use, how would they get sorted
Sure.
under the
So,
current 9?
A
or the
lot
recommended 9?
Sure, a lot of it would actually break out between purchase services.
Hold on a second. Okay, so,
Sure.
so our current purchase services, right?
So the one area, just to be clear, that we don't have really is professional technical services. And what professional technical
Yeah.
services typically is, it's like contracted services. So for special ed, maybe contracted
Sure.
speech, occupational therapy, legal fees is a professional technical service, consulting fees is a professional technical service. Purchase services really picks up a lot of your grounds and maintenance categories. So it could be a cleaning contract, a trash removal contract, exterminating, things like that, equipment repair. Other services could be anything from tuition to travel and conference or professional development. And then you have other services, that was other services, I'm sorry. And then supplies and materials could be custodial materials, books, resources, library materials, things like that.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, could you just clarify then, as we walk through the current ones we have, where would we resort them in the new 9? For example, purchase services, would we put that,
So
or
9
or 12, whatever we go?
So purchase services would end up kind of breaking out into both professional and technical services and property services. So right now,
Okay.
purchase services includes things like consulting fees and legal fees. That would fall into the professional and technical services, but you also have purchase services that would fall into property services.
Okay, that's our grounds maintenance.
That's part of your ground maintenance, but also things like equipment repair. Typically, the majority of equipment repair is in grounds and maintenance, but you could have equipment repair for a laminator at a school or technology equipment. That typically falls within property services.
Okay,
The tuition, which is what you currently have as 4 and 5, falls within other services, unless you were to segregate that out. Professional development, which actually falls within your purchase services, would also kind of go into your other services. Same with travel and conference. Your supplies are largely the same, supplies and materials. The only difference is your utilities technically do fall within supplies and materials, so your current 6 and 8 are really one and the same within the unified chart of accounts. Property can then be anything from actual equipment that you're purchasing, or in the case here, we have the lease for the Fitch Academy. That would fall within property or equipment. And then other is typically very small. It's usually dues, fees, and memberships, or miscellaneous other objects. So within our chart of accounts, we have like board expenses. That would be considered another. And then revenue, like we mentioned, would be like excess costs, building fee rentals, things like that.
Kitty?
I wasn't at the budget finance subcommittee meeting, so I guess when I read the memo and looked through it, if we're going through the process of revising this policy, why wouldn't we just stick to what the state recommends? I mean, if we're gonna, to me, either you stick with what we have or we switch to the state. The hybrid to me is even more confusing.
Sure.
Sorry, that's my opinion.
So the only item that really came up as a discussion was the tuition, and whether or not we just wanted to highlight that as its own individual category. But as I mentioned, it's its own individual itemized expenditure.
But if we're going to cherry pick certain items to highlight, then we stick with what we have, right? Because that's what we've done essentially. So if we're going to go to the state standards, let's go to the state standards. That's my opinion.
I would support that.
I guess.
We have a hybrid now.
Right.
I think there's, without a doubt, we're gonna switch out of what we currently have. It's whether we go with the 9 or the 12. I just got worried that tuition, do we wanna highlight it or not? Because other, I don't like other.
It's a line,
Other
it's-
is problematic.
But it's going to be a line item and it's up for discussion. It's always a subject
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Right.
what is the purpose of this
So
reporting, right? Versus our budget process.
Right, so
and transparency.
in operational terms, and this year, you're not going to see any operational difference in the sense of on a monthly basis what we report out, and also on that quarterly basis what we report out. Ultimately, this helps us align some of our categories. It means we can easily report the state reports, and then it also, from a secondary point of view, really qualifies, from my perspective, what I'm allowed to make adjustments to, which categories and which ones, because that's the second part of this, which ones I need to come back for Board of Education approval. So, so in essence, from the board optics, you're not going to see any difference in the way the reporting is this year. And then you can always ask what situation, right? I mean, that's always a, so it just allows us to.
So certainly from an administrative point of view, do you feel that this would be more efficient, obviously, to be completely in line with the state?
Sure.
But obviously, these 6 and 7, tuition public and state, tuition all other, are captured. It's not as though we're going to lose those lines or
No,
ability
so-
to track those, obviously. It's just a question of taking them out of a singular category,
And
correct?
you also have utilities added.
Right.
Correct. And so if these were to be adopted, I think the next step is to align our actual chart of accounts within Munis and update our chart of accounts so that it's reflective of the 9 categories. Currently, the chart of accounts is not reflective in that way and has not been updated since the mid-90s.
Mr. Chairman, since this was kicked to this board, in fairness, you may have board members who are on the budget committee be perhaps wanting 1 or 2 of these categories pulled out separately as they're shown here. So I just want to be in fairness to them, just.
Right, well, certainly as it relates to, process, we're having a detailed conversation about this now. We're going to, it'll get on a board agenda. I'm not sure if it was going to be the next one. It'll be the one after that, and you'll probably get some of these similar questions, and then probably action then at the meeting after that, because I do think that there will be some board questions and discussions, but at least we can say that at the policy level, we've had a hash through, and it can be ready for their full board discussion. Yes.
Is this going to change how the budget is presented with the RCs year over year?
No, so the RCs are essentially your cost centers, so you would retain those cost centers
It's already-
as you are. The budget that would go forward in fiscal '21, I think we're anticipating to be in the same format. If you were to realign your chart of accounts, which is a very long process, to highlight those 9, right now the budget book and the financials actually collapse into 4 categories: salaries, fixed, operating, and equipment. You might want to consider long-term, not for fiscal '21, but maybe future, breaking that budget into the 9 categories so it clearly aligns with the chart of accounts as well as the policy.
Okay, because sometimes we have that issue when we realign and we're looking year over year, we have problems
No,
trying
so
to
it's-
justify and
Correct.
reconcile.
So this is more,
So this doesn't affect that?
this is more the general ledger account as
Okay,
opposed to the
perfect.
cost center.
Got it, okay.
All right. Anything else? Any other questions, comments?
I think the only other, the 3 of us have sort of previewed what Shipman and Goodman's policy is, and I think bringing something back would just be the difference. Essentially, the difference would be that, and just adding clarification of what the administration is allowed to transfer to and not. That's your main things.
All right. All right, very well.
Could you, I'm sorry, could you
Sure.
elaborate on the transfer aspect
Yes.
of it?
So
You've mentioned the transfer aspect, so let's just,
So if let's say you went with the 9, right?
Right.
So if we're transferring something from sub broad category 1 to broad category 2, I would need to come and ask permission from the board for that. But any of this, I'll call them categories underneath these broad categories, right? So you don't have to. I just have to apprise the board at the next meeting that I did those. It's still reportable, right? But I just don't need permission to do that.
Right.
But anything between these categories, we need to come back.
Page 2 of the policy.
Right.
I'm sorry, I missed that, yeah.
And actually, to be honest with you, what we have right now is a little bit ambiguous. Hence, I want to make sure that I know my limitations.
Okay, so then do we have 2 issues? One is whether we go with old 9 or 12, and do we need to clarify the language in the policy if it's ambiguous? Are those two issues we have?
Yeah,
So the language, I think we could get Shipman and Goodwin to write language that more accurately affects what the law says, which is that the superintendent has the right to transfer.
Okay.
Well,
Okay, so
it
there's,
says it, it's that what, this was, the superintendent's authorized to make such transfers as necessary, as long as it doesn't exceed 5% of the annual budget. Right?
Right.
Yeah, but I think that's.
You're not,
Do we have the language change emergency?
Those are emergency. Those are, the 5% is if it's an emergency.
It's an emergency, so it's not clear if it's under any regular situation that I can actually do anything.
okay, so there's two issues we're addressing here.
And Shipman has some other minor changes, so we would come back to you with a red line copy so you could review all the language before you went to the board.
Okay,
Right,
got it.
But they tend to be insignificant, to be honest with you.
right.
No, just so we know
Right.
what it's not just the 9 versus 12 versus old, we're also talking about the wording of the policy itself.
Right, so
Right.
we were really only gonna do the graduation policy today, but since this came up
Yeah.
on Tuesday, we
Mark,
thought we would fill you
Can't we
in.
just do the red line version with the full board, I mean, instead, are you trying to bring this on Monday?
No.
No,
Oh, okay.
no.
So you tell me
Right.
how you wanna do it.
Well, I
Then
think,
we can review it personally and then you send it to us and then discuss it full board.
yes.
Do we want to have an opinion on the 9 versus
Okay.
12?
Well, I was gonna
Yeah.
say,
There's
I think,
another policy
I think
we
that
wanna
there's, you know,
discuss.
consensus around the 9, going from the current 10 that we have to the state recommended 9.
Or do we want 9 or 12?
9.
Or 11?
I mean, it'll be a full discussion, and I think, you know, and it could still go for keeping, you know, tuition, public, non-public, separated out as categories. But, I mean, I think that, you know, the sense of the committee is that since those items, you know, those tuition items are line items separately, that we would be okay going with the, you know, with the state 9, as opposed to,
So
you
are
know,
we
keeping
going
them out.
to vote on whether we want the 9, the 12, 11, or old?
Well, we don't have to, you know, we don't have to vote. I can give the sense of the, you know, the committee as to that, you know, that change. I mean, it'll be a vote at the board level, certainly.
Okay, because I would perhaps say the 12, but
Okay, well, that's fine. I mean, we could absolutely.
or just keep the tuition, make it 11.
Right. We could, I'll report that.
however you wanna say it.
I'll report that out. Okay. All right,
Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, are
Yes.
you expecting this to show up on the board agenda or no?
this? No.
Yes, no,
No.
okay, right, thank you.
No, not yet. I'll report that.
Oh, yes, okay.
What happened at this level, and advise that it'll be something for, you know, full consideration and voting at another time, but we've begun this
We
conversation.
can include them in the board packet, right? Rich's memo,
Yes.
so they know all their options?
Yep, absolutely. So item 2, discussion of Board of Education Policy 6840 graduation requirements. This, as is pointed out in Marge's memo, was something that we have, you know, voted on as a board previously related to the curriculum changes or graduation changes from 2021, 2022, and 2023. These policies that are before you codify, really, in essence, those discussions. But why don't I let Marge run through it?
So I included the old policy rather than, the redlining was very confusing because there were such major changes. So really, this just codifies the distribution of credits that you voted on and the mastery assessment and the alternative routes to graduation, and cleans up our old policy to make reference to the SAT rather than the CAP. But other than that, this is, some of the provisions that were in the previous policy on transfer of credit, whatever, have been vetted by Shipman and Goodwin, and they continue to be consistent with state law.
All right. Questions?
Well, we've already approved the graduation requirements, right, at the board level, so to me, this is a formality and not, you know, I don't think there's a lot to change or wordsmith or tinker
Right.
with.
I'm sorry. One that just jumped out at me, just so I understand the difference, on the two new proposed policies, in regard to phys ed. just how it's worded differently, is there a reason why we wanted, is it, so it's 1 credit after 23, and it's 4 years of 1 credit before 23, or up till 23.
Wait, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Wait, I'm looking at the old policy versus.
No. Look, we can move to the 2 new policies.
Okay.
Right.
But just distinguishing between 20, 21, 22, or up to 23, and then the policy for 23 and beyond. Just how we reference, phys ed jumped out at me, but you see it says 4 years, 1 credit, but we don't distinguish that in 23. Is there a reason?
Right, just because those are the state requirements, that they be broken out, physical education and wellness and health and safety, as opposed to the way we did physical education and health combined.
Are we still expecting 4 years of physical education?
I don't think it's 4 years anymore. I think that they're looking to see how they're gonna disperse the credits and,
Do you see where I am? Okay, so I got
Yeah.
4 years in the beginning, and I've got 1 credit in 23. So I just want to make sure, because what we're expecting.
Typically, that would suggest to me that you're taking a semester, you know, over the 4 years, right? Typically.
right.
I don't
Right.
know. I just want to make sure we're
No,
clear.
I think it is, and I think that what Ellen was struggling with is the way health is combined now, that she wants to make sure it's a full credit over 4 years as opposed to being combined. But so yes, it is. It is 4 years of PE, but we'll confirm before we go, but we haven't reduced PE.
Okay, it looks
Yeah, maybe I
like,
should put it that way. We have not reduced PE.
is it, or I guess my recommendation that we, if it's appropriate and legal in the state what they're looking for, that we phrase it in the same way, so if someone looking at 21 versus a 24 grad is looking sort of apples to apples where they can. Does that make
Wait,
sense?
Krista, what, you're on the.
Yeah, so we'll start with, no, just on the new ones.
So 20 through 22, right?
Yeah, so the new ones. So it says
So the fact that it says 4 years.
So
here,
4 years
and
and
then
and here's
your
and
kid
Doesn't say
is,
4 years.
here's 23.
and then you go to 23 and it just says 1 credit. So I don't want people, or just to say 4 years, or just have
Right.
consistent, however we want to say it.
So
If
just
we're,
put 4 years.
Well, the question is,
However you wanna-
the question's just like, is it mandatory to take it every year or not? I mean, that's really what the
Well,
focus
yeah,
is.
and I think we should be prepared if we're discussing this in public, because over the years, a lot of people have asked the question of,
Yeah.
do your sports count as phys ed?
Exactly,
And
that's
it's-
why
I mean,
I'm
like, the
jumping on
reality
this.
is behind it.
Well, that's
So-
a no.
I know, but
That's
so
a-
that's
That's why
what, I
I'm
think
jumping
be
on it, yeah.
prepared for those questions, either from the
That's
audience or
that's a
the
no.
full board.
Not that
Yeah.
I necessarily agree with that being a no, but it is a no.
But to
But-
Krista's point, if it's 1 credit, not over 4 years, then I understand what you're.
right, and but in
yeah.
20
Right.
to 22, we say 4 years.
So we need to
Just to
yeah.
be consistent,
Right.
so people
Clarify
say,
that.
okay, there's no
So I will.
change
Right, there
from
is-
20 to 23. Here are the changes, so it just flows, let's use the same format as we go. No,
I
no,
wasn't
no, no.
understanding,
You see
but
what I
that
mean?
makes sense,
So
yeah.
just, and I don't know if phys ed jumped out because people do ask all the time, can I waive out of phys ed? But is there any other, I don't know if there was any other place where it seemed written one way, 20 to 2022 versus 23. I'm not focused on the old policy, I'm just looking at the new one.
Right.
Yeah, okay, so English, that seems fine, history seems, I don't know if we want to, you know, on 20 to 22, you give a total of credits for English and history. Do we want to be consistent in that formatting?
So it's 9 credits total in humanities. So I think that's where the total is, but I could add totals after each individual, after English and history if you want.
Oh, it's different.
Well, do you have to have 4 in English?
Yes.
Okay, so we have 4 in English
3.5.
on the old, right, and how we, oh, I'm sorry. No, we have
The new.
4. It's 4 and 4, but we specify 4 in the old, in the earlier grades.
Okay, I can add
Just,
totals.
I'm just trying to get consistency as we're looking from 2022 to 23, that, you know, we can say, okay, this is how it's gonna change, and this is how it's not changing.
Okay.
Okay, so we did not have world language, we don't have world language? There's no
One
world
credit.
language for 2022?
Nope.
Okay, so that's new. After 23 will be a world language requirement. Okay. I don't know whether we highlight that when it's presented, I don't know. Or we've already voted on it.
We've already,
Yeah, that's true. And just more of a consistency between the two policies.
Not a problem.
for the two documents, really. Yeah.
We're documents, yeah.
The policies are,
Yep.
yeah, okay. All right. Any other questions or comments on the board policy 6840 graduation requirements? All right. Then I guess I will report out, and this will be on the agenda on Monday, correct?
Right, so I'll change
That the sense of the committee is to approve the policy changes for the curriculum changes that we have already
Right.
completed.
Right.
All right. Public comment, anybody? Right.
We'll just make a couple of, with your permission, just a couple of order in the way some of these things are labeled, just, it won't change any words.
No, wait,
Sure.
no.
Right. Okay. All right, we have a motion to adjourn. All right,
Motion?
second. Second.